Since 1939, this lake has hidden much of the recent past from view. But ironically, perhaps, it's also revealed a far older past. Chris Cornett is an archaeologist who's discovered, along the shoreline, abundant evidence that many thousands of years ago there were stone cutters living here. Stone cutters who supplied the scant population of Neolithic Ireland with goods of Wicklow granite.
This was found, I suppose, a little bit further up the lake here, about half a mile up the lake, but it's one of dozens that have turned up on the shoreline here of the reservoir.
Dozens?
Dozens. We've got a large number. One site in particular has turned up dozens of, just from one location alone. But actually all along the shoreline here we've been finding stones just like this. So this is a saddle quern for grinding probably cereals, maybe other things too, but largely we think used for grinding cereals to make bread for flour.
And this other smaller stone beside it, is that was used on top of that for the grinding purpose?
Yeah, here we have what we call a rubber stone, so this would have been used to do the actual grinding itself.
What kind of stone did you call it?
A rubber stone.
Rubber stone?
Yeah.
It's anything but rubber, because I carried it over here, and it's good. But for rubbing along
exactly,
the top of that.
Exactly, for rubbing along. So they're both made of granite. They're both very, very hard stones. They're perfectly suited for grinding.
Right.
Because they have a bit of a rough edge as well.
Right, so they'll last an awful long time, in other words. And
exactly.
They won't chip away and all the rest of it.
And this being granite country, these are certainly produced from granite that was sourced here in the area.
So this was a kind of a quernstone sourcing area, in other words, because of the granite?
Yeah, I mean, we've just so many of them turning up, and some of them are quite clearly still in manufacture, have never been used.
Right.
So we believe that they were actually being manufactured here in this area, and possibly being shipped to many parts of the country then.
So almost on a commercial basis, in other words?
It would appear to be on a commercial basis, yeah.
Right. So they would trade these for other
Exactly.
things?
Trade them for things like flint, which wasn't native here. You didn't get flint here,
right.
Or good quality flint. And flint was very, very important if you wanted to make knives or scrapers, and the type. That was the technology of the day. It was a stone technology. This is an example of it, but flint was very, very important.
But you have been finding bits of flint along the shoreline as well, isn't it?
Yeah, we've been finding bits of flint, and I have an example here. This is a
scraper of some sort?
A flint scraper, yeah. And right. This is probably from the Stone Age, from the Neolithic, so roughly 5,500 years ago. I also have here actually another example of an artifact from this period, staying with stone technology again. This is a stone axe.
Right.
It's a polished stone axe.
That's not granite?
No, this isn't granite. It's a type of shale, we think. And again, this is found on the shoreline here in the reservoir.
So these two bits here in hand would have come from somewhere else in the country, in other words. Is that the case?
Well, the shale may have come locally. That you
right.
do get shale
you
here.
You can get that here.
And flint does come locally, but this type of flint looks like it's come from probably up the north.
From the Antrim coast or some place
possibly
like
somewhere,
that.
yeah.
So even back 5,000 years ago, people were trading commodities up and down the country.
Absolutely, yeah.
So this was the quernstone capital of the country, more or less, around
exactly,
because of the granite.
Exactly, yeah.
Now, the reason that you've been able to find these things, ironically, is because of the lake here.
Exactly,
which has only been here, what, 75 years?
It's only here 75 years. It's hard to imagine it. You look at it today and it looks like it's been here all the time for centuries. And
well, interestingly, whenever you showed me your photographs of the outline of the Neolithic houses that were found along the shore.
That's right.
I said to you, oh, that's handy. They had the house right beside the lake.
Yeah.
And of course, you really pointed out, no, there was no lake back in those days.
There was no lake here, yeah. We found two Stone Age houses here, both of them. One of them, in fact, was just over here. Another one on just about half a mile up that way. And both of those would have originally been actually overlooking the King's River.
So the river was here. That would have been the attraction for them.
Yeah, exactly. That was the attraction. Now we've got a lake in the place of where there was once the King's River. And further up then you've got the Liffey as well. So both of those rivers were used to create this reservoir 75 years ago.
Right, and it's the action of the water on the reservoir that has unearthed these things. Is that the case?
Yeah, well, effectively what the reservoir has been doing over the last 75 years, it's been eroding all the soil. And
sorry, when you say the soil, you mean this stuff here in the bank?
Exactly.
Beside us?
The topsoil and even part of the subsoil has been just eroded away, removed by the reservoir.
Right.
And what we're finding now are the objects that were in that soil originally and have just been left lying on the shoreline.
So these were on the lake shore, so to speak, but what the lake shore, of course, wasn't a lake shore in those days. It was just simply under fields, in other words.
Exactly.
Yeah?
This was all agricultural land until 75 years ago. This was actively used for farming, and of course people were living here. And now we have evidence that people were living here for thousands of years.
So the tradition, and indeed the industry of stone cutting in these parts, is much older than anyone previously imagined. But farming on this land is older still, And when, in the year 1939, the Kings River and the River Liffey were dammed to create the Poulaphuca Reservoir to provide a much-needed water supply for Dublin, over 70 farming homesteads were served compulsory purchase orders, and the people who lived in them were instructed to gather their belongings and quit their homes forever. Compensation was given, of course, but how do you put a price on generations of attachment to house and land? But there was no standing in the way of progress and no hope of resisting the rising waters. The distinguished place name scholar Liam Price had the prescience in that fateful year to organise a survey of the soon-to-be flooded area and urged local people to take photographs of the doomed townlands for posterity. We are that posterity, and Chris Cornett has brought all of this work together and produced a painstaking and inevitably poignant chronicle of the last days of the Lost Valleys.
The foundations of those houses are still out there, and there were a lot of bogs in this area and lots of little rivers and streams apart from the Kings River itself. And so this was a very important source of fuel for the local communities. So that was one of the things that was lost, not just the agricultural land, but actually the source of turf for so many people living here.
So that must have been, I mean, if we cast our minds back, it's not that long ago. I know there are people still alive here, and
right.
you know, for whom that was a fairly traumatic event. Because, I mean, it's not that they were given any choice in the matter, but they were standing in the way of progress, so to speak.
They weren't given any choice in the matter. In fact, Tim Lennon, who lived in Mahon, he said famously afterwards that they didn't need a sheriff to evict you. They just built the reservoir, they built the dam, and the water was the sheriff, and you were evicted whether you liked it or not.
Right, and they lost the homes they'd been living in for generations.
They lost. Some people lost their entire farmsteads, and there was a feeling actually that in some cases they were some of the lucky people because they could actually start freshly. It was the people, particularly on the Ballynockin side and the Lacken side, where the mountains are, that those farms tended to maybe lose a third of their holding.
Right.
Now this caused a real problem to them because they're left with 2/3 of the farm, and it wasn't necessarily as economically viable as it had been when it was a complete farm.
And this was subsistence farming to begin with. It wasn't exactly a huge big
it was
place.
subsistence. These were relatively small farms.
But I mean, it was an extraordinary evacuation when you think about it, because I mean, apart from the fact that you had generations of tradition of living and working on these lands, and families going back, you know, for probably for hundreds of years. But you know, the graveyard, the cemetery as well, had to be relocated.
That's right. They exhumed an entire cemetery at Burgage and moved it to a new site just a short distance away. Yeah. But this was a huge project. I mean, there was nearly 5,000 acres flooded to create this reservoir. It was one of the biggest infrastructural developments ever done in the state. I mean, if you tried to do it now, it would be very, very difficult, I think. But just to imagine that such, you know, in one case, Balnahown, one townland right at the centre of the lake, was entirely removed from the map. The entire townland has disappeared. You know, I can't think of any other development that's ever had such an impact on the Irish landscape as this has.